Port Moresby, 27.12.1940, 14-mile drone Schwimmer. They thought it was just a clumsy reconnaissance plane. Minutes later, entire squadrons were falling in flames. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning wasn't just another fighter, it was a revolution. Above New Guinea's jungle canopy, 12 Lightnings from the 39th Fighter Squadron roll for the sun, built to strike from altitude, hit hard and vanish before the enemy can even react. Before the Lightning ever cast a shadow over New Guinea, another silhouette ruled the Pacific. Mitsubishi's A6M Zero light, long-legged and almost impossibly agile, seemed less like a machine and more like a rumor of invincibility. In China, then over Oahu, then sweeping south through Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, the Zero wrote a brutal lesson into the sky. In a tight level turn, it could outcircle almost anything the Allies could put up. Turn radius small, sustained turn rate high. Every degree the Zero carved off in the horizontal meant one thing. If you tried to fight its fight, you bled energy until you were sitting still with a gun sight painted on your canopy. This wasn't an accident of engineering. It was doctrine made metal. Japan's naval air arm was built around Kantai-Kessen, the decisive battle. Protect the fleet, break the enemy early, train a cadre of elite aviators to kill quickly in the merge. So they honed the pilot as much as the plane aerobatics, until muscle memory took over gunnery, until burst discipline became instinct. When the Zero arrived, its pilots arrived with it, sharp, confident, and terrifyingly efficient. American flyers learned the hard way. In the Philippines, over the East Indies, the lesson repeated, never turn with the Zero. In the horizontal dance tradition meant slaughter. Why did it seem immortal? Because the battlefield the Allies kept choosing was flat, a two-dimensional arena that rewarded low wing loading and punished brute speed. The Zero thrived there, paper-thin skin, no self-sealing tanks, minimal armor, all traded for one thing, agility. It could cruise astonishing distances on a sip of fuel, loiter over targets, and then snap into a turn that left heavier Allied fighters skidding wide. At low to medium altitude, with speed bled off and the fight flattened, the Zero owned the circle. But energy is a currency. Spend it wrong, fight the circle, and you go broke. Early Allied machines like the P-39 and P-40, rugged but underperforming at altitude, paid too much too fast, and the Zero sent the bill with 7.7mm stitches across their wings. Add in veterans forged over China, and the legend calcified. The Zero couldn't be outturned, and it couldn't be outclimbed, at least not inside that narrow, familiar box where everyone kept fighting. But a battlefield is only flat if you agree to keep it that way. Tilt the board trade altitude for speed and speed for altitude, and the rules bend. The very strengths that made the Zero lethal in a level turn began to look like handcuffs when the fight went vertical. Climb too hard and it starved, dive too fast and it shook. The aircraft that had terrorized the early war had blind spots, if and only if you refused to meet it where it was strongest. Across the ocean, America faced a riddle it couldn't ignore. How do you beat a fighter you can't outturn, outclimb, or outrange? At Lockheed, a young engineer named Clarence Kelly Johnson had one answer: break every rule. Instead of one engine, give it two. Instead of wing-mounted guns that converge only at short range, put every weapon in the nose, 4 50 caliber Brownings and a 20mm cannon, firing a single devastating stream. And instead of playing the Zero's two-dimensional circle, create a fighter built for the vertical battlefield speed, altitude, firepower. Kelly Johnson's vision was brutal in its simplicity. Outthink the doctrine. If the Zero ruled the turn, the Lightning would rule the climb and dive. Don't dance flat strike from above, zoom away, reset. This was not evolution, it was defiance. The P-38 Lightning would not survive by tradition, it would survive by rewriting the very physics of the fight. And in the crucible of the Pacific America's strange twin-tailed experiment was about to prove whether breaking the rules could win a war. By late December, the theory of the Lightning had to meet reality. The 39th Fighter Squadron drilled one mantra into every cockpit: altitude is life insurance, speed is life. They would not turn with a Zero, they would strike from above, then vanish into the sun. Captain Thomas Lynch checked his formation 12 Lightnings new to this theater, but heavy with expectation. Among them, a farm boy from Wisconsin, Second Lieutenant Richard Bong, about to face his baptism of fire. This was not a routine patrol. Intelligence warned of Japanese bombers and Zero escorts sweeping in from Leh. For the Americans, this was the chance to prove the Lightning was more than a rumor. December 27, 1942, 12 Lightnings lift into the rising sun. In minutes, they will write the opening chapter of a revolution.
Bandits, 12 o'clock load. Dive, fire, climb, reset.
December 27, 1942. Over Port Moresby, the doctrine of the Lightning became reality. Boom and zoom attack from altitude unleash, then vanish back into the sun. Against the Zero's horizontal spiral, the Lightning redrew the battlefield in 3 dimensions. Chasing in a dive meant broken wings. Climbing after meant stall and helplessness. In minutes, the invincible predator of the Pacific was tumbling into jungle fire and open sea. Entire squadrons shattered, shocked by a fighter they could neither outclimb nor outrun. What began as 12 ungainly silhouettes under torn camouflage netting became the strike that ended an illusion. For the Japanese, the age of the Zero's easy reign was closing. For the Americans, a new doctrine was taking flight. Two doctrines collided over New Guinea. On the left, the Japanese art of the horizontal dance, turn fighting in tight spirals. On the right, the American answer, the vertical thunder of the Lightning. Unlike wing-mounted guns, the Lightning's nose battery, 4 50 caliber Brownings and a 20mm cannon fired straight ahead. No convergence needed. At 400 yards, the stream hit as one spear, not a scattered shotgun blast. Accuracy meant lethality. With turbo superchargers feeding its twin Allisons, the P-38 held power where the Zero gasped for breath. Its ceiling soared above 40,000 feet territory the Zero could never reach. Energy was the real currency of air combat. Altitude stored potential. A dive converted it to speed. A climb restored it again. The Lightning turned the sky into a 3-dimensional chessboard, while the Zero remained trapped in a flat circle. In the Pacific, doctrine decided survival, and doctrine was changing. In March 1943, the Japanese convoy Operation 81 steamed from Rabaul toward Leh. 8 transports, 8 destroyers, carrying thousands of troops and supplies, meant to reinforce New Guinea. In just 2 days, the sea became a graveyard. 8 transports and 4 destroyers lay shattered. Nearly 3,000 Japanese troops perished. Only about 1,200 reached Leh. A disaster that crippled Tokyo's plans in New Guinea. The P-38 didn't drop the bombs. It opened the sky for those who did. By holding off the Zero, the Lightning made low-level skip bombing possible and turned the Battle of the Bismarck Sea into an Allied triumph. This was more than a tactical victory. It marked the moment Japan's advance faltered. From New Guinea to the Solomons, the tide of war had begun to turn. April 18, 1943. 16 Lightnings of the 339th Fighter Squadron lifted from Guadalcanal under Major John W. Mitchell. Their task intercept Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, flying from Rabaul to Bougainville. To succeed meant a wave-top flight of 435 miles, radio silence and navigation by dead reckoning alone. Lieutenant Rex T. Barber made the fatal pass, though credit remains disputed with Thomas Lanphier. What is certain, Yamamoto's Betty erupted in flames and fell into the jungle below. The death of Yamamoto was more than a tactical strike, it was a psychological earthquake. Japan's supreme strategist, the man behind Pearl Harbor, proved mortal. No admiral, no fleet, no doctrine was beyond the reach of the Lightning. The Lightning's story was not only written in gunfire. In its unarmed F-4 and F-5 reconnaissance variants, the P-38 carried cameras instead of cannons, becoming the eyes of the Pacific campaign. These missions mapped Rabaul, the Bismarck Islands, and beyond. Every photo meant intelligence, fuel dumps, airstrips, ship convoys, targets that would later burn under Allied bombs. Without guns, survival depended on speed, altitude, and stealth. Pilots risked everything flying alone and unarmed deep over enemy strongholds. From these frames came the roadmaps of victory raids, plotted bombing runs, guided campaigns, shaped.
About the air cover?
The Lightning did not just fight for air superiority, it saw for it. And in war to sea, first was to strike first. The Reconnaissance Lightnings were forgotten heroes, proving that vision as much as firepower was the true multiplier of air power. 2 men came to embody the Lightning's doctrine of vertical combat. Richard Bong, the disciplined hunter, waited for the perfect angle, firing only when deflection guaranteed a kill. Patience was his deadliest weapon. Bong's precision made him America's top ace 40 confirmed victories, each a testament to controlled discipline and mastery of energy fighting. Thomas McGuire, by contrast, was bold. He invented new moves. The McGuire roll, the high-speed yo-yo turning raw aggression into tactical brilliance. Reckless to some, but devastating in practice. Two styles, one doctrine. Together they forged the creed of vertical combat, where altitude and speed, not tight circles, decided life and death. From Midway to Guadalcanal to New Guinea, Japan's most experienced aviators were worn down, battle by battle. Their finest aces men forged in China, and Pearl Harbor fell faster than they could be replaced. Training pipelines collapsed. Where once pilots logged 500 flight hours by late 1943, replacements had barely 100 to 150. Many had never flown at high altitude. Before facing the Lightning thrown into battle unready, they became prey. The 251st Air Group began 1943 with 80 veterans. By year's end, barely 10 survived. It was not just numbers lost, it was the breaking of a tradition, the bloodstream of experience cut off. For Japan, the loss of its aces was more than attrition. It was the unraveling of an air arm that could never be rebuilt. The Zero was built for a war that no longer existed. Its strength's tight horizontal turns, feather-light agility came at a price. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, no tolerance for high-speed dives. Above 30,000 feet, it suffocated. The Lightning, by contrast, was a creature of the vertical battlefield. Turbochargers fed its engines clean power into the thin air above 40,000 feet. Dive recovery flaps steadied its plunges. Hydraulic boosts let pilots muscle the big fighter even at breakneck speeds. Energy
Remember,
management,
every watt
altitude
saved is
plus
a bullet earned.
Speed, dominance. When air combat became three-dimensional chess, an economy of energy traded between altitude and speed, the Zero's horizontal dance had no stage left. It was a masterpiece of the old doctrine, but in the new war, it was already obsolete. The Lightning was never just a Pacific weapon. From Iceland's frozen skies to New Guinea's tropical storms, it carried America's fight to every horizon. What began as a single prototype became an industrial armada. By the time the J and L variants rolled off the lines in Burbank, the P-38 was no longer an experiment. It was a factory-bred war machine. Atlantic or Pacific Europe or Asia, the Lightning proved itself everywhere. A twin-boom silhouette that meant for friend or foe, the reach of America's skies was now global. The P-38 Lightning proved one truth: air combat was no longer about graceful turns in a flat circle. It was about energy. Altitude, speed, and firepower combined managed traded and spent like currency of survival. The twin-boom fighter became the first true marker of the vertical battlefield. From the Lightning came a lineage. The P-80, America's first jet. The F-86 Sabermaster of Korea. Each carried the DNA of Kelly Johnson's radical vision fight in 3 dimensions, not 2. Outclimb, outspeed, outgunned. The Zero began the war as legend, but the Lightning ended it as lesson. And that lesson still echoes. Air supremacy belongs not to tradition, but to those who adapt fastest, climb highest, and strike hardest.